So if you want to get really used to how the edit page works, I would highly recommend grabbing this footage, dragging it down into the timeline, and just trying to make a story out of these clips. Now, a couple quick tips that I think are pretty helpful for actually putting together a story here is I like to use what I call the anchor technique. This is something that we go into a little bit more in our end-to-end editing course, which I'll tell you more about in a little while. But the big idea here is that you start with one shot where multiple things are happening. So we have this wide shot of him walking towards the craft. We have her kind of looking around. And so we can kind of start with this as our anchor for this part of the edit. And then we can use these other shots to enhance it. So we have her kind of looking back and forth right here. We also have this shot of her kind of looking as he walks forward. We have this shot of her looking back and forth right here. And so we can take this shot and we'll just kind of trim this. And we can drag this up to a new track and kind of put this over our shot like this. So we have our wide shot here, and then we have the close up here. And we can kind of move this back and forth without overriding this just because it's in that top layer. And we can kind of just play around with this until we feel like it works. Maybe we want to cut to a close up of him, which we have right here. Yeah, maybe this one. Sure. And again, we'll just drag that up like this. Maybe we'll just cut to this first and then cut to her. So we have him walking forward. And we can kind of mix these in however we want to make this scene not only have all of the actions that happen in the scene, but also make it look exciting and have a bunch of dynamic shots, right? And we can choose whether to use shots or not. I mean, we have this shot right here, which I really like. Her kind of thinking things over a little bit.
Check it out.
We could decide to put this right here if we want to. But we're using the shots that are already here down in the timeline to figure out where to put our other shots. So that's the anchor technique. Now for a couple of shortcuts. These are really, really important. Let's go ahead and put this right here. And let's say I want to trim this about this much. I can do that with my normal selection mode, my normal tool here, which is activated right here in the toolbar. Or I can use the trim mode. That's this one right here. And what this does is it does similar things, but if I grab the edge like this and I bring it this way, it actually kind of sucks the clips down. And so I can grab the edge here and I can trim this, but it doesn't leave a gap. And so it's just a little bit quicker way to trim things. It's the exact same thing as trimming this with our normal selection mode, selecting this emptiness and moving it down like that. It just does this all in one little thing. The other thing this tool will do, this trim tool, is if you click and drag in the middle of a clip towards the top, what this will do is slip this clip. And that means that it's going to keep the same in and out, but it's going to use a different part of the clip. And so if I want to move it down like this and use this part,
Just what happened?
then that works. I can also slide the clip if I click and drag in the middle towards kind of the bottom of the clip like this. And that moves this back and forth, and it kind of trims the other clips around it. And this makes more sense if we have these all on one line. I'll just drop these in real quick. If I'm in the trim mode here and I grab this lower part, I can move this back and forth and it trims the other clips there with it. So I can trim the other clips, or I can move this kind of clip back and forth. And so this is a nice way, if you don't quite have your clip settled in just right, you can use the trim tools to really kind of move things back and forth. And so it really, really helps, especially if you're trying to make an edit just right. And when you grab this and you move it back and forth, it shows this multiple view. And so we have the first frame and the last frame of this clip. Then we have the last frame of this clip and the first frame of this clip. And so you can see all of the transition points all on one view here. So trim tool is really useful, especially if you're trying to edit a little bit quicker. And speaking of editing quicker, keyboard shortcuts are very, very important. You can hit T to select your trim tool, and A for your normal selection mode. Remember, A just kind of moves things around like this, overwrites things, but T will do the slip and slide and that kind of thing. You can hit B to go to your blade tool to chop this up however much you want. But again, I would highly recommend learning the keyboard shortcut just to split this at the playhead. Control backslash like that, because that's a nice way to do that. The other major keyboard shortcut I'd highly recommend learning is the ripple trim shortcut. Let's say I want to chop this part of the clip off, either by doing this and then deleting it and moving it down, or I could use the trim tool and move it down like this. Well, I can do that with a keyboard shortcut by aiming my playhead right where I want the clip to start and hitting Control-Shift left bracket. That's going to do all of that all at once. It's just going to trim this and ripple everything down this way. Ripple is the fancy word for moving clips down so that there's no gaps. And so we can ripple trim, Control-Shift left bracket for the beginning. And then if we want to trim the end, Control-Shift right bracket like that. Now, you may notice that both Control backslash and Control-Shift left and right bracket take two hands on the keyboard. And so if you have one hand on the mouse, it's kind of awkward to remove your hand from the mouse and then hit a keyboard shortcut. It's slightly faster actually to probably just grab it with the mouse. And so to actually save time, I'd highly recommend customizing your keyboard shortcuts. So how do you do that? Up here in our DaVinci Resolve menu, we can go down to keyboard customization. And this is a whole big panel dedicated to keyboard shortcuts. And all you have to do is click on whatever modifiers you want and then whatever you would press after that modifier. So Control-Shift left bracket. And this will show you the command. So this is start to playhead. If I click on this, that'll open up start to playhead right here. And if you want, you can change the keyboard shortcut for this. So I have mine set to Q for start to playhead and W for end to playhead. Let me kind of walk you through this because it's kind of annoying. So I'm going to switch back to my DaVinci Resolve shortcuts here. By the way, they have presets for shortcuts that are kind of like Adobe Premiere Pro and Apple Final Cut, Avid, Pro Tools. What I usually do is I set this to DaVinci Resolve and I'll do this. This Control-Shift left bracket, this is start to playhead. If I click on this command right here, that'll bring that up right here. If I click on this little plus, that will make a little box here and I can type whatever keyboard shortcut I want. So start to playhead, I'm going to select as Q. Great. Now it's going to come up and say Q is already assigned to something, which is fine with me because I'm never going to use this view source timeline viewer. You might use it, but I'm not going to. So whatever you assign to it, it's going to tell you if that's already a keyboard shortcut. So I'm just going to say assign. Now it gives you a little warning here. The reason there's a warning is because neither of these keyboard shortcuts are going to work anymore because one keyboard shortcut is assigned to two things, which you would think it would just do both things, but it actually does neither. So I'm going to go out of here, go back to my just vanilla keyboard here and click on Q. Then it's going to list all the commands that are under Q. So we have start to playhead, which is what I want, and then source timeline view. Let's click on source timeline view here, and let's just get rid of the Q shortcut right there. Great. We're going to do the same thing with W. So let's go ahead and open up W, dynamic trim mode. Let's take that off. Okay. And then we're going to look up Control-Shift right bracket, which is end to playhead. Let's make this W. Great. So now we have Q and W set to start and end to playhead. The other thing that I like to do is set this S key to split clip, which is Control backslash split clips right here. So I'm going to actually set this to S. It's going to say, hey, S is already something. Let's say, okay, assign. Then let's go back to S and take away toggle slip slide. Boom, like that. Now I have Q and W and S, and those are really the only keyboard shortcuts that I change for Resolve. Everything else seems to make pretty good sense to me, but those are the ones that are really nice because I can use 3 fingers to do a lot of editing, and I'll show you the power of that here in just a second. But this looks good. I want to make sure to save this. So I'll go up to these 3 dots and say save as new preset. We'll call this intro shortcuts, and okay. Great. So now this is saved. I can close this, and now we should be able to hit Q, and that's going to trim the edge, and W, that should trim the edge, and S should split this. So I have 3 fingers that can do a lot of these editing tasks. So check this out, especially if you're editing something where you have a lot of footage or whether you're just trying to cut down maybe a podcast or something like that, you can go through here and just look at the waveforms like this and see when somebody's talking, right? And so you can split it with S, and then you can get rid of this part with a ripple trim to start. So Q, like that. See how this works? S, Q, just like that. And I can do this by just aiming with my playhead and then Q, right? Just like that. And I can trim this whole thing and cut out all of the silence really, really quickly. Just by looking at the waveforms and trimming it to those waveforms. So that's a great way to cut down things that have a lot of talking and just keep the talking. In fact, that's how my editor, Sam, is cutting this tutorial. Pretty much same thing, Q, W, and S. What I would recommend doing, especially if you haven't edited before, is I would double click on each of these clips, set the in and out for whatever part looks interesting, and drag it down here into the timeline. Add these all to the timeline and then kind of mix them together and put together a story in the edit page. Now I'm going to cheat a little bit and use a timeline that I've already worked on just so I can show you some more cool stuff. And to show you this kind of stuff, I'm going to import a bin. So just like you can open a project or export a project, you can export just a bin or a timeline in Resolve. It's really helpful. I can right click here in the empty space in my media pool and go down to import bin. And I'm going to select a bin that says Casey only. You will not have this bin. Okay. Say it with me. I will not have this bin. This is Casey only. All right. It's not included in the files. This is just for my demo purposes. Okay. So we're going to open, and that's how you import a bin. Inside of this bin, I'm going to have a couple of timelines that are going to help us learn some stuff. I'll just double click on my edit demo thing here. And here we have an edit that I made using this footage here on the edit page. Let's take a look.
Whoa.
Mm-hmm.
Go check it out.
No, you go check it out.
Fine. Okay. Check it out.
What was that?
So it's a cohesive story. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. The kids show up, drop their bikes. This is what they see. They argue. The guy starts to walk forward. He's nervous. She's nervous. It moves. They kind of panic, and they go in to investigate. Now, a couple of things to point out here about this edit that I made. One clip here has a split, but there's no cut. We're not really cutting to a different clip. It's just split here for essentially no reason. What we can do is we can actually repair this by right-clicking here on this edit point and saying delete through edit. And that's going to make this into one clip, which is going to be helpful later when we're doing color. There's no reason to have a clip split if you're not going to cut to a different clip or severely change that clip. By the way, a great way to move up and down the timeline when you're zoomed in is to click and hold the middle button on your mouse and drag. And what that will do is let you kind of grab this timeline and move it back and forth. And that actually works for just about everything in Resolve. I can move this preview around by clicking and dragging on my middle button, on my scroll wheel button. That's kind of the click and drag and pan sort of shortcut for most things here in Resolve. So I can move this over here, and it doesn't look like we have any more through edits. Oh, wait, there's one. Let's right click on this, delete through edit. There we go. Good. But actually I had this split over here for my audio. And the reason for that is because this audio is really loud. So if we play this back, those are just really loud bike sounds. And so the cool thing about the edit page is not only can you organize your video tracks and kind of change their order and everything, but you can also mess with your audio. And so what we really want to do is take the volume down on this clip. We actually have the volume turned way up here in our edit, but normally there's a little line right here, and you can click and drag this up and down to change the volume of your audio. And so I had this turned way up because I want to hear kind of the quiet parts, but it's way too loud for when the bikes fall down. And so what we can do is just split this right here, and I just want to split the audio. And when I select this, it's going to select both the video track and the audio track. And I can just select the audio by going up here and unlinking this chain link here. And then I can just select the audio and move that separately. I can also hold Alt and click on this track just to select it by itself. But either way, I want to select just the audio, and then I can split it with Control / or whatever you set your keyboard shortcut to. I can just split that right there. And then I can have a separate volume line for this part and this part. And that lets you change the volume of your audio. Now, we don't want there to be a really harsh difference in our audio where the ambient noise is really loud and then it turns it down immediately. See, if I bring this back, we'll have this kind of sound where it turns it down immediately. And so what we might want to do is crossfade this. I can right click on this edit and go down, and I can pick one of these crossfade options. It doesn't really matter. You can pick the 12 frame, let's say. And what that's going to do is crossfade these clips together, which if you have two different clips, it's going to fade out the first clip and then fade in the second clip kind of gradually so that you don't notice a cut there. But when you have the same clip at different volumes, what it essentially does is it kind of just turns down the volume over this amount of time. So it's a lot more gradual and you don't notice that difference. We could do the same thing here. Yeah, that's nice. And I find this is a really nice way to adjust your audio over time. The other way that you can do that, I'll just take this volume line down a little bit. The other way you can do that is hold Alt and click on this line, and that will give you these little control points. And you can move one up and one down, and you can kind of adjust the level of volume over time here. So you can get really detailed with how you want to change your audio in your clip. And so if you have one really loud part, you could just kind of squish that down. So we could do this. I'll just kind of get rid of this and bring that out like this. We could hold Alt and add a couple of control points here. And I can bring this control point down and just bring down that little part. And that's good too. It's really kind of dependent on what you want to do. The reason I tend not to do this so much is because it's kind of a pain to grab these little points and move them around. And it's easy to kind of mess this up or get too many points, or, you know, if I have to move one, then I have to move the other one. And it just kind of is annoying. And so what I'll usually do is just select this audio, turn this clip down, and crossfade these. Because then I can do stuff like roll these edits back and forth. And that's going to change where that adjustment is really easily. It's really up to you. Here, you'll notice this little triangle. This is from bringing this little white handle over. And what this does is this makes a fade, like a fade out. And so anytime that you have a clip where you want it to fade in or out, you can take these little white handles and bring them in, and that's going to adjust a fade. That works for both audio as well as video. We have these little white handles in this video too. And so we have this fade up from black.
Go check it out.
And then fade down, right? So if you're making a movie trailer where you have stuff fade in and out all the time, that's a good way to do it. And oh my gosh, there's so much more to get into with adjusting stuff on the edit page, but we're already gonna have a long enough YouTube video here. So I wanna show you just a couple other things in the edit page before we move on. Let's talk about the inspector. So the inspector is a panel that you can open up over here on the right. And what this is a list of properties for whatever we have selected. Now, this is a universal thing in Resolve. There is some version of an inspector on just about every page. And so this is an essential concept for you to understand. When you select something, this clip has certain properties. And when we have this selected, what it does is it opens up those properties here in the inspector. So we select something and we adjust its details and its properties in the inspector. Now I can hit this little button to expand the inspector so that it's the full height of the screen. and we can see all these different properties. So every clip has a bunch of properties. So I'll select this clip here and we'll just see what these all do. There are tabs up here, and these are different categories of properties. So a clip by default is going to have video and audio tab. And depending on what other fancy things you do, these other tabs might be available. But the video, we start with the transform properties. These are ways that you can move and scale and rotate your video. And these controls, some of them have sliders, which makes sense. You slide this back and forth. And some of them just have numbers, which you can double click in and replace with a number. Or you can click and drag left and right on any of these numbers to control it sort of like a slider. You can double click on any of these properties to reset them. You can also hit this little reset button. And so now if we want to zoom in on her face, we can zoom like this, and we can adjust the position to be right there on her face. We can adjust the rotation if we want to. And that's how we would do that for this clip. Now it's only adjusting this clip because this is the clip that we have selected. If we go to this clip, it is unaffected. In fact, if we're over this clip and we're looking at it, we're adjusting the zoom and nothing's happening. That's because we have this clip selected. And so that's loaded into the inspector. And so we zoom this way far up. We go back to this one and it's zoomed in really far, right? So let's go ahead and reset everything in our transform. We also have cropping, where we can crop the image. We can adjust the softness of that crop. This is great if you want to mix kind of one side of one shot and the other side of another shot, something like that. Or if you want to do kind of a picture-in-picture thing, you could do some cropping on your image and then position it down in the corner, something like that. And at that point, if you wanted to put this clip over something else, you could just put this over other clips here in the timeline, and those would be layered like that. You can adjust the composite mode, which is kind of the transparency of things. If I put this image over this image, we could take the opacity down and kind of fade this so it's kind of ghosted over it. We could also change the composite mode to different things like add or multiply and all different kinds of composite modes. This works a lot like an image editing program like Photoshop or something like that. Same kind of idea. And there's just so much more to go over. But basically, if you want to adjust how a clip is treated, its position, its rotation, how it interacts with other clips, the volume of the audio, the pan of the audio, the pitch, there's equalizer, there's all kinds of stuff that we'll get into a little bit more when we talk about Fairlight. But this is where the properties for anything that you have selected lives. Okay, so again, if we want to make this small, we can zoom it out like that just by selecting it and adjusting it in the inspector. One thing that's cool is that we can stabilize clips here right in the edit page. I can just select the clip, go over to stabilization and hit stabilize. And what that's going to do is take out all of the little jitters and everything for the clip. And it works pretty darn well. Works pretty darn well. The stabilization here is excellent. And there are a bunch of different options here for the stabilization, which you can play around with. You'll get various different results, but just know that that's kind of where that happens. We can correct a lens, so you can distort or undistort your lens. Here where it says retime and scaling, these are just kind of the processes for retiming. If you actually want to do a time remap on something, you can right click on it and go up to retime controls. And you can grab the edges like this and make it play back faster or slower. You can even kind of stop in the middle of this clip and click on this little arrow, and that'll bring up a little menu, and you can add a speed point. And what this will do is let you change part of the clip's speed to one value and the other part to another value. So we can go from slow motion into fast motion. This is great for drone shots and punchy edits and things like that. That's how that's done. And when you're done with your speed changes, you can just hit this little X button right here, and it'll give you a little indicator that there's a speed change on it. But the idea that you select something and adjust its properties in the inspector is really, really, really important. Now, sort of related to that is there is a whole section of the edit page called effects. So if I switch to effects, that's going to bring up my effects panel. And this has, just so much stuff in it. This is where you get a little bit more fancy in the edit page. There are all kinds of tools here, including transitions, which you just grab one of these transitions and put it in between two clips like this. Just drag it in between on this edit. That will make a little transition like that. You can even select this transition and switch to a different transition here in the inspector. Okay. If you go down to open effects, there are all kinds of effects here that you can apply to your shots. So if you want your shot to be blurry, you can grab something like directional blur, drag this on here, and then you select this clip. And because this clip has effects on it, it has a little indicator right here. And it also has the effects tab enabled where you can find the effect that you applied to it and you can adjust the properties of the effect, right? See why this is so important? Is because anything that happens in this clip, you pretty much adjust here in the inspector. And so we can adjust the blurriness and all of that, all of the controls for this effect right here in the inspector. We can turn the effect on or off, or we can delete it by hitting this garbage can like that. And that's how we would apply any kind of effect you would want to apply to a clip. So sharpen, stylized kind of stuff, like a mirror effect. Do all kinds of cool stuff. Watercolor, that's cool. And the free version of Resolve comes with a lot of effects, and the paid version has a lot more. So there's still quite a bit of effects in the free version, but there's certain more intense effects that only come with the paid version. We've been working with just clips here in the timeline, but in the effects panel, there are also things like titles and generators. So a generator just generates video. So I could grab something like this 4-color gradient, and I can drag this down into the timeline just like I would drag a clip from the media pool into the timeline. So now we have this 4-color gradient. Again, I select it and go up here to the inspector, and I can adjust the colors. So I can make a nice background with that, and there's all kinds of different generators. There's even some really fancy ones that use the power of the fusion page. So I could do this hexagon glow. That thing's pretty crazy. One of my favorites is this honeycomb. There's all kinds of controls here to change how this looks. There's also transitions and all kinds of stuff here. So we can drag this in. This will be kind of some graphics. There we go. And you can select this and adjust your text, you know. Intro, right? That's cool. You can use a custom logo. You can do all kinds of stuff with this. And each effect is slightly different because it's just kind of built for different purposes, right? So this one has different color controls and things to be able to customize this template. Now, if you want to make your own text that's maybe just a little bit less specific, that isn't this kind of specific looking effect, you can go up to titles. And there are kind of two sections of titles here. There are just the normal titles, and then there are fusion titles. Fusion titles are just fancier titles that use the power of the fusion page. We'll get into that in a little bit, how fusion works and all that. But we have some basic stuff here that's actually really great. So for instance, text, if I just grab normal text, I can put this over my 4-color gradient, and I can select the title controls here in the video in the inspector with the text title selected, you know, my title, and I can change the font and the size and the tracking and all of that kind of stuff to design this title to be exactly how I want. And there are quite a bit of controls here to make this look how I want for my project. Let's go and kind of make a title here. I could just take this text and drag this down, and we'll call this Tuesday on Earth. That's the name of the movie. Pick a different font. Let's just say Poppins Black. Push up that tracking a little bit. There we go. It's nice and tasteful. Let's change the color. Maybe make this kind of a slightly kind of teal color, something like that. Great. There we have our title. Now, let's say that we want to animate something. We want to change a property of a clip or a property of this title over time. Here's how we can do that. We have this text, which is actually just generating a video. If I go over here to the inspector, it says title and settings. If I switch to settings, this is going to give us the same transform controls that we have with any of these clips, pretty much the same transform controls. And so what we can do is change the position of this text just by taking the video that the text generator generates and moving that video around. There are these little diamonds right here. These diamonds are what we call keyframe diamonds. I don't actually know the real name for it, but I call it keyframe diamonds. Because what you do is you click on this diamond, and that will set a keyframe. Now, if you don't know what a keyframe is basically a way to tell your software that you want a property to be a certain value at a certain time. So when we click this keyframe diamond, we're telling Resolve that at 49 seconds and 11 frames, so right here on this clip, that we want the position to be at 0, 0. If we move to a different time, so let's move to kind of the start of the clip, we can adjust this position again, and you'll see there's this little tiny greater than indicator, this little arrow. That means that there is a keyframe on this track, and it's that way. And what that also means is that if I change this position right now, that's going to add a new keyframe. You can see that it turned this keyframe red. And what it's going to do is animate in between those two keyframes over time. And so we've just made an animated title. Isn't that cool? Now, is this really the only indicator that something is animated? No. If we go up here to these buttons right here, and we click on this one that looks like some diamonds, we click on that, that's going to open up our keyframes panel for our timeline. And here we have these familiar little diamonds. And we can see the properties that these are animating. So we have a diamond on this track for position X and a diamond on this track for position Y. And then we also have diamonds here for transform, which is kind of like the group of those properties. So I can take this diamond for the transform and I can move this back and forth, and that's going to change where that keyframe is on my track. And so I can take this first keyframe and move this up at the start, and the last keyframe and move this at the end. And throughout the entire length of the clip, it's going to move from down here to up here. If I want this to go faster, I can push these keyframes together because it'll take less time to go from one keyframe to the other, which means whoosh, this goes faster. And so that's generally how you'll animate stuff in Resolve. And really that same kind of way of animating things by setting a keyframe and adjusting the distance between the two keyframes, that's pretty much how you animate anything in most software. In fact, as you use Fusion, keyframes are all over the place. But just know for now that you can animate stuff by using those keyframes and adjusting the distance between them. Now, when something moves and comes to a stop on a video, it actually looks a lot nicer if it kind of slows down before it stops. That is called easing a keyframe. Like you easily just stop, right? You ease into it. And so what we really want to do would be to ease this keyframe, this last keyframe, so that it slows down before it stops. So it doesn't just kind of jerk to a stop like this. It doesn't look good. And so here's how you ease those keyframes. Right now, in this version of Resolve, there is another keyframe panel, which I can click, and that will open up here kind of where the media pool and the effects go. And it will give you another graph, just like is down here. But you can click on this little button right here, and that will switch to your curves view. And this will give you a graph of the values over time. And you can select this last keyframe and click on this button right here, which will let you flatten the handles on this keyframe. So you can grab this little handle. Let's just zoom this in a little bit. You can grab this handle and kind of adjust the graph. And so if you grab this handle and kind of push it out like this so it's flat, you have this nice easy curve.